Hi, and welcome to Series 2 of the Pen to Publish podcast with your hosts, Alexa Whitten, author, typesetter, and independent publisher, and
Alexa Tewksbury, author, editor, and proofreader.
Hi, and welcome to episode 5, Finding the Right Editor for Your Book and for You. So getting the right editor for your project is really important. Just like finding any outsourcer to do anything that you obviously outsource to, you need to make sure that you fit nicely and that they, the editor, is just as invested into your project as you are. Getting off to good communication is critical, and I'm sure you'll be able to get a feel for the type of person you're dealing with when you start communicating with them. Conversely, an editor will also get a feel for you. So keep in mind good communication from the off. It's always a good start, and it will set up for a much better job at the end.
Now, there are lots of really good editors around. So with so many to choose from, how do you find and pick an editor who's going to be right for your particular book? Well, first, I think just start by thinking about your own project. What kind of editing do you want for your book, and what can you afford? Now, in episodes 2 and 3 of this series, we talked about the different stages of editing. And if you've decided you really want to invest in your book and give it a proper professional finish, then you're looking at structural or developmental editing, which is the same thing, but just with different names, line and copy editing, and proofreading. But not all editors offer all those services. They're likely to specialize in just one or maybe a couple. So if you're after a line and copy edit, you need to narrow your search to find line editors and copy editors. There's no point in asking a structural editor who works on the big picture of your book to work on the fine detail and do the line edit for you, unless they happen to offer that service too. And it's always worth checking when you've found perhaps 2 or 3 potential editors that you've understood what they're offering and that what they're offering fits with what you want. Now, I specialize in line and copy editing and proofreading. So currently, unless I do some further training, I won't be able to help you with a structural edit because that's not what I do. Next, is your book fiction or non-fiction? Some editors will work on both, others will only work on one or the other. I edit a lot of non-fiction for adults, but I also specialize in editing children's fiction because I write children's books. I have edited adult fiction, and depending on the project I will, but I don't claim that it's a specialism for me in the same way as children's is. So again, you need to refine your search to make sure you're approaching editors with the right experience for your book type, because those are the editors who will deliver the best results for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I found that I use different editors for different projects. One of my editors, for example, is quite excellent at referencing and all things research. So I tend to use her for my highly referenced business books. I always use you, Alexa, for children's books, because I know it's her speciality. And I've just started using another editor, Yasmin, giving her a bit of a shout out because I know she listens to the podcast, for my adult fiction, as she seems the perfect fit for those projects. Plus, she really enjoys them. So using the right person, even from my level, also makes sense too.
As well as editors who are happy to work on different sorts of fiction, you'll also find there are specialists in specific fiction genres, so romance, crime, or historical, for example. And if you've written a historical novel, it would be worthwhile finding an editor who's experienced in that genre, because they'll understand the elements that particular type of book needs. But no matter what your fiction editor's specialisms are when it comes to genres, crucially, they will understand how a story works, how a plot is built, how characters are developed, and how to create snappy dialogue. And they'll be able to bring all that knowledge to your book. Non-fiction editing is very different. Now, it might seem that fiction, non-fiction, it's all writing, but non-fiction requires a different skill set. In the non-fiction I edit, there are various elements to consider. So tables, bullet lists, cross-references in the text. And as Alexa mentioned those things earlier, citations, footnotes, endnotes, captions. And aside from any editing, these also have to be checked for consistency of presentation through the book. Just as an example, do the picture or figure captions have a full stop at the end? If they don't, that needs to be the same throughout the book. And then there are the headings. Now, in fiction, the headings are most likely chapter headings. There may be variations, but mostly it's just the main chapter headings for each section. In non-fiction, there are likely to be far more headings and subheadings. And for some publishers I work with, one of my jobs as the editor is to give those headings a code so that the typesetter knows what weight to give the heading. Is it a main section heading, a subsection heading, or a heading within a subsection? And each category of heading will be a different size on the page and maybe even a different font. And Alexa too, you incorporate those design issues into your typesetting, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And it's something we'll go into in much more detail in series 3. However, I have found that having a second pair of eyes on that final proofread invaluable, as keen-eyed editors will pick up on things like this. I have to say, I do have one editor who doesn't look at this at all. And as much as it isn't technically their job, it makes my life much harder if she's not looking at those things, as that second pair of eyes really makes for a much more polished or consistent job. And Alexa One, I know you're really good at that for me. Obviously, especially if I work with someone who has done the coaching with me, we obviously establish that hierarchy, and it's not ever something I give the editor to do or to fix for me. But sometimes I'll get it wrong. So having that extra pair of eyes does really help.
I think I'm just naturally picky. Which
is that what it is?
Probably makes me a better editor.
Yeah, probably.
As a non-fiction editor, you're used to dealing with and looking out for those more technical aspects, and as well as dealing with the main content and presentation of information, whereas a fiction editor will be more experienced at the complexities of plot, characterization, and story structure. So there is a big difference between the two types of editing. Some editors may do both, others may specialize, but you need to make sure you find an editor who has the right experience for your type of book. With non-fiction editing, I don't necessarily think your editor needs to be a specialist in the subject matter of the book. Their job is to work on the words that you're presenting to them, and that's where their skills lie. But if, for instance, you've written a book on accounting for small businesses and you manage to track down an editor who has an accounting background, that's obviously going to be really useful. Now, I edit a lot of nonfiction for the Christian market, so I have a good amount of experience in that. And I feel very comfortable editing those sorts of books. And an author in that market might feel equally comfortable giving me their book to edit because of that experience. But an editor without that specific experience, but who knows their stuff and is given a proper brief for the project, should also be able to do the job. So as I say, I don't feel that you necessarily need to know about the subject matter, but it can certainly be helpful. And it can also be up to the editor to take on the jobs they feel confident in being able to handle. Now, I don't do academic editing. I'm not academic. I have no experience in that side of editing. Despite my nonfiction editing skills, I would not feel confident taking on an academic editing project. That just feels outside my remit at the moment. So I suppose it's not just authors finding the best fit editors, it's also editors finding the best fit authors. That's why it's important to talk through a project with a prospective editor by phone or by email. And the majority of my clients I've actually never spoken to, but I communicate with them a lot via email. Having said that, I did have a phone conversation recently about a series of children's books, and it turned out not to be a straightforward editing job. There's some complexity to it. And at the end of the conversation, the author asked, "Is that something you feel you can do?" So that was then up to me to weigh up.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. I did a massive project a couple of months ago. Oh, no, it wasn't a couple of months ago. Seemed like a couple of months ago, but it was actually late last year, where it was a medical book. And luckily, the editor, Lindsay, who is part of my team, she had a background in medical knowledge, which was invaluable because actually the author had made several mistakes about medical stuff. And she was a doctor, not Lindsay, the editor, but the author. And Lindsay was able to pick up on those. So Lindsay's skill set in the medical sphere, which I didn't know she was she had any really good specialty in, was fantastic for the project. I think it is really important to make sure your editor has some area of specialism, especially if it's something like referencing, medical, veterinary, something that really you have to be 100% accurate on. I think it's important to get the right match. So I totally agree.
A couple of other things to bear in mind. This is one of our bugbears, both of us. What's your time scale? Because that needs to fit with the author and the editor. I can't say it often enough. Editors do get very busy. We often get booked up 3 to 4 months ahead. I know of one who gets booked up 12 months ahead, but authors are prepared to wait for her because she's really, really good. Now, the ideal is to find your editor and book them well in advance, certainly before you've finished writing your book. Now, I would say that making a booking at least 4 months in advance is a good idea, if not 6. Now, that may seem scary, but making the commitment to send your book to an editor on a certain date might, if you're struggling for any reason, give you the impetus to push on and get it finished. It's a deadline. And if you find an editor you really want to work with, booking in advance will ensure that you get your spot in their schedule. And for independent publishers, I know that's the same for you. I know we have this conversation often. Why do they think we can do it in the next 24 hours?
It's always quite funny when someone makes an inquiry and is put out when I tell them that I can't turn their book around in 2 weeks. I mean, it doesn't work like that. Even if your book is print ready, the typesetting and the cover, getting a proof and all that stuff that happens behind the scenes takes many weeks, and a rush job will look as such.
And then maybe the final thing to think about when finding your best fit editor is the cost. What's your budget for the editorial work to your book? You'll find costs do vary from editor to editor. Does the one that you found, who you feel will be a good match for your book, come with a cost you can afford? Now, freelance editors are running their own businesses with all that entails, and they have to make a living. And editing can actually be quite hard work, so they have to charge what they need to charge to survive and cover everything. Do their prices suit your budget? If they seem right for you in every other respect, let's hope so. Okay, so I think those are the key things to think about when looking for the right editor for your book. You can find editors by Googling. Now, I belong to the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading, and they have an amazing directory that's overflowing with qualified editors and proofreaders working to the standards of the Institute. So that's an excellent place to look. And I'll put the link to that in the show notes. There are also companies who provide editing services via freelance editors, such as Reedsy, who you may have heard of, and I'll put a link to them in the show notes too. Finally, once you've found an editor you'd like to approach, they're going to need to know all about your book, your timescale, and what you're looking for from an edit. Now, when I get an inquiry, the first thing I do is establish the timescale, because if I can't fit with the author's timing, then there's no point going any further, unless I can sell myself as the best fit editor for their book and persuade them to wait for me. Now, once I know that the timetable will work, then I need to know whether the book is fiction or non-fiction. I need a brief summary of the content, that's always helpful, the word count, and I need to see some sample pages so that I can gauge how much work might need doing. Now, that and the word count enable me to estimate the time it might take to do the work so that I can offer a quote. If I'm one of several editors who's being approached, I might offer to do a sample edit so that the author can see exactly what type of amendments I'll be making to their writing. And I know that some editors do offer a sample edit, but they will charge for that as well. What editors may ask for from prospective clients may vary, but they will certainly need to know those things that I've just listed. So to book your editor, you may then need to sign a contract. You'll certainly need to read and agree to their terms and conditions, and you may be asked to pay a deposit for the work.
And just an add-on here, obviously that's how Alexa One works if she's not working with me on a particular project. If you come to me with your book and your edit hasn't been done, then obviously it's something that I would add on to my services, and I would use one of my pool of editors to do it for you. Alexa One for sure if it's a children's book. And then I have 3 other editors on my books as well who I would use depending on the project. Now, I know Alexa One gets busy, so I always find out what her current turnaround is with projects. We are working on 3 projects at the moment, and I love working with her. But like I said at the beginning, communication is key when hiring any editor. And Alexa One certainly has given you a lot of useful information in this episode. So do take some notes and make sure you get the right editor for your project.
And that's about it, I think. As you can see, finding an editor isn't just about doing a quick Google and plumping for the first name you find. There is a bit of work involved, but it's just so worth it when you find an editor you feel you have a connection with and who understands what you're aiming for. Then you can be confident you're both working towards the same end goals. Right, now next week, we're going to be talking about rhyming books for children. Now, writing in rhyme that works, both in the rhyming and the rhythm is vital, is really hard. An excellent rhyming book is a tricky thing to achieve. We've worked on several rhyming picture books together, and they're great fun, but they do need a lot of work. So if you're a writer who aspires to write in rhyme, please do tune in. See you next week.
We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.